Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. For this month's Birds Notes program, we're going to talk about what one can find on a trip to Florida. Joining us from the Audubon Center in Huntington is bird expert and conservationist biologist Mark LaBarr. Thanks for being with us, Mark.
Always great to be here, Fran.
So it's great to hear that you were recently in Florida. I hope it was warm and sunny for you.
The weather was actually mixed. It was funny that we had one full day of rain, which everybody I talked to said this doesn't happen in Florida, but it was fine by me because it was still 70 degrees.
Awesome. So, what did you see? Why were you there, and what did you see down there?
So I took a trip down to see my daughter, May, who Fran has actually been on the show a couple of times when she was a lot smaller. She's going to school down there in St. Pete. And so I did what I call passive birding. So while I was down visiting May, I had my binoculars with me, but I wasn't quite focused on the birding thing as much as I was on being with my daughter. But it's Florida, and so there's lots of good birds down there to see. Some you don't even need a pair of binoculars for.
Right. So just south of St. Pete is DeSoto Beach. Is that one of the places you went?
Yeah. So I got down there and I camped out there, and so I got to wander around the beaches a little bit. And because it was rainy, it was not at all crowded. So there were gulls and terns, and I got to see some shorebirds there. The one that seemed to be out there quite a bit was a willet. I saw many of them. They have those white wing patches, a pretty sturdy sandpiper that you can see along the beaches there. And if it flies, it has those white wing bars. And then as I was walking, again, kind of just enjoying the ocean and the empty beaches, I came across one of my old friends, which is a piping plover. Now, folks might remember that I've spent some time down in the Bahamas doing some wintering surveys for them. And so this was a kind of a fun little surprise. It was just standing right in front of me as I walked down the beach. And, it was great to see them here on the west coast of Florida, as well as, when I go down and see them wintering in the Bahamas.
Right. Is that unusual to see them in Florida? I mean, it seems that they're a shore bird and fun to watch running around the beach.
Yeah, they're not so unusual. They are seen on both coasts, and, it's about the same latitude as the Bahamas. So, in the Bahamas, roughly, I don't know, 20%, 30% of the piping plovers winter there. So it's not too far of a stretch to also see them on the Florida coast.
Great. And so I take it you were on the campus, May's campus. Did you see stuff there, or what'd you do there?
Yeah, so it's funny because I went to school up at UVM, and when you're walking along campus, you might see a bird here and there, but it's in the city. She's right there on Tampa Bay, and so just walking around campus, there were a whole bunch of white ibis, which reading the latest Audubon magazine are kind of becoming a suburban bird. Great big bird. Again, you don't need your binoculars to really see them with that little downturned bill. And they were all over the campus, just flying around. There were a couple of ponds there. And they were kind of like UVM's pigeons, I guess, to some extent.
I remember being in Florida, and there was a whole gathering of them in a mangrove swamp on the trees. It was like they were having a cocktail hour or something. They were
yeah, just chatting away. So, it's kind of fun to be in a different place on a different campus. And again, it's right on the water. So we were able to, just walking along and chatting. I looked over, and there was a little blue heron sitting, right in the mangroves, which run right along campus there in the waterways. And so, another great bird that we don't see up here, we have our great blues, and we occasionally see great egrets and stuff like that. But little blues, again, a good one. I didn't even have to raise my binoculars up, and I pointed it out to May so she could, her friends kind of think her a little bit silly because she knows some birds and stuff like that. But, that's all due to her dad.
Right. Well, I'm sure they love that. So what else did you see down there?
So, it was interesting because I had visited May in the spring, and jokingly, I had wanted to see a Florida scrub jay, which are endemic to Florida, and we had walked around for a couple of different parks and didn't see it, and then we went to a place when I was down there recently, and we spent about an hour there and saw lots of blue jays. And, this is where the passive birding comes in. I wasn't really paying attention, and sure enough, boop, they bopped up right in front of us. So we gave each other a high five because it had been kind of our joke that we were on the search for the Florida scrub jay. And so now we have to up the thing, and I have to try to find a Florida grasshopper sparrow. So I'm sure that'll take me to some more interesting places with my daughter.
Well, it sounds like you also saw our blue jays. So these are different, but you saw both kinds of jays down there?
Yes, and at first it was a little confusing because I'd see a blue thing flying around and I'd go, scrub jay? And it'd be like, no, just a blue jay. And then, of course, when we weren't looking, the scrub jays popped out and gave us a little show, and so that was great.
And then you saw one of my favorites, which I've seen just a few times, the black-crowned night heron.
Yeah, so this was interesting because we went to a place to have fish and chips, and we're sitting out on the deck, and the black-crowned night herons, especially this one, just wandered all around, kind of again like, pigeons do and the sparrows, looking for dropped food. And here he was, or her, standing right up on the neighboring table. And there was, just to the left of this picture, there was actually a guy there sitting there having a drink. So he was in a stare down with this black-crowned night heron.
That seems unusual.
Yeah, it surprised me because, like you said, they're mostly a night predator. And you do see them, but not that often up here. And down there, they were just like wandering all over the docks. They must have knew that, people would feed them and there were scraps. And so it was great. They came within 2 feet of May and I sitting there at the table. It was great to see them that close.
That's terrific. And I guess you visited some other folks while you were down there.
So I did. I went down and saw my friend Missy. And this is an old high school friend that I haven't seen in years. And Missy put me up, and we went out on a boat ride out to Cabbage Key. She lives down in Fort Myers. And again, I had my binoculars with me, but, we saw things. We went to another 6 Mile Slough, it's called, and the great egrets are just sitting there in the trees next to you. Or feeding in the marsh, and just big birds that are easy to see. You can kind of notice them with the background and not just use the binoculars. Another one we saw were snowy egrets, which are a little bit smaller than that, but they have these bright yellow feet. That's kind of their best ID for them is seeing those yellow feet and that black bill. And even though it's white like the great egret, you can differentiate between the two.
It's mainly the yellow feet, or is there something else? It's a little bit smaller?
Yeah, smaller. And if you get a look at those yellow feet, you know that you got a snowy egret.
Okay, great.
And the next bird I did have to use my binoculars for. I heard them flitting around. They were in the trees as we went on this awesome boardwalk walk. Again, chatting away, not really doing any birding, but the blue-gray gnatcatcher was twittering away up in the trees. A pretty common bird. We saw him with some titmice, and so it was great to see one of those. We get them in Vermont, but you have to go to some special places to actually pick them up. So they're not a real common bird here. And then the last place we went to was this pond, and we're sitting there, and it didn't seem to be any birds there, but just across the pond was an anhinga, which looks very similar to our cormorant that we often see up here in Vermont, but it has a really pointy bill that it uses to spear the fish with before it then gobbles them down. So, another great bird that I wasn't really looking for, and it popped up in front of me. So, I really advocate passive birding when you're hanging out with others.
Well, and I love the anahinga, how they dry their wings. Don't they do that? They just hang out there, and very long neck.
Yes, they like the cormorants will do just that. And so, just a fun bird that we don't see. And, I might have put my binoculars on them, but I wasn't like, when I'm visiting, too much of a dorky birder out there constantly looking at things. I could maintain conversation and bird at the same time.
Well, you said that you were out on a boardwalk, so which sounds great too. I know there's the Corkscrew Swamp has an incredible boardwalk there outside of Naples, but sounds like you had a great trip.
Yeah, this is similar. It's a slough that is right, pretty much in downtown Fort Myers. You can hear traffic on either side, but once you're in there on the boardwalk, it's just a great walk of a cypress swamp, and lots of people using it. Lots of naturalists out there to help you out if you have some questions.
Cool.
So yeah, it was a great trip, and probably the scrub jay was the highlight, and but seeing that piping plover was also a good one too.
All right, Mark, thank you so much. And if you have a bird-related question, you can pass it along to Mark at the address on your screen, or you can drop Mark an email. His address is mark.labarr@audubon.org. You can send Mark your questions and pictures, and he'll try to find the answers for you in an upcoming edition of Bird Notes. Thanks again, Mark.
Always great to be here. See you, Fran.
And thank you for joining us across the fence. Stay well.